All right, we are live.
Okay.
Just watch the participants. This is the best part, just watching people pop up. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again for day 3 of the summer 2023 BRAINterns webinar series. It is 9:00 a.m. I'm just going to vamp for a second just to make sure everybody has time to get into the Zoom room. But again, my name is Hannah. I work for the Department of Neurosurgery, and I'm here today to moderate the webinar. How is everybody doing this morning? How have you been liking BRAINterns so far? I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments or in the chat box. Just as a reminder, the chat function, we want you to adhere to just professional language, keep it professional, no cross-talking. If we do see some inappropriate messaging happening, we will disable the chat function moving forward for the rest of the webinar series. So again, just keep everything positive and professional in the chat box. Oh, amazing. I'm loving these comments. It's incredibly fun. Yes, who knew a webinar would be so fun? Loving it. Very informative. Help me make new connections. Yes, that's what we want to hear. Oh, so happy to hear everyone's enjoying the webinar so far. As a reminder, we will be posting all the recordings on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours for today's recordings. Yesterday's recording should be up today. If you are interested in receiving a certificate of completion, don't worry, we will send you one at the end. We're going to send out a survey at the end of the webinar series on Friday, July 21st, where you can indicate if you would like a certificate, and we'll generate that for you and send it to you via email. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today. Dr. Joanne Willey is joining us. She is the chair and professor of the Department of Science Education at Zucker School of Medicine. Dr. Willey has been involved in planning and designing the Zucker School of Medicine and held a joint appointment between the Department of Biology and the Hofstra College of Arts and Sciences and Science Education Department at the School of Medicine since 2009, and in 2013 she joined the Department of Science Education full-time and assumed the position of chair in 2014. So she is very knowledgeable when it comes to what you need on your CV and what to anticipate in terms of applying for med school. And today she's going to share some of her thoughts on the whole process of applying to med school and what you can do to help yourself succeed in this process. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Joanne Willey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody can hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, great. All righty. So we're going to get started. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the application process to medical school. So if you're already a medical student, this probably isn't a talk for you unless you want to hang on and do some comparison and chime in at the end. I'm going to try very hard to save a considerable amount of time at the end for questions. So to that end, I may wind up skipping through some of the slides very quickly. So can everybody, Hannah, just let me know, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, looks
okay.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So let's get started. So just in the chat, what was the first, if you want to just let me, if you have an idea, what was the first medical school in the United States? Does anybody know what the first medical school was in the United States? Just put your answer in the chat. Harvard, Harvard. Keep going. UPenn, Penn, Harvard. All right, it looks like it's a Penn, Harvard. Oh, we got a Yale. Okay. The first medical school in the United States was University of Pennsylvania. Woohoo! I graduated, I got my undergraduate degree there in 1981. Dr. Woldenberg, who is our Dean of Admissions and also a neuroradiologist who you will meet next week at this time slot. was a graduate, and also Dr. Langer. Okay, here's a hard one. Who was the first woman graduate of an American medical school? Anybody know? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, it was Elizabeth Blackwell, Geneva Medical College in New York, which later became Cornell. All right, let's get down to business. Whoops, I just expanded the chat so it's huge. All right, never mind. Okay, let's get down to business here. So this is an infographic that is released by the American Medical College Application Service, and it has a lot of information on it. I want to just point out a few things. So this is for the most recent, which is 2021. And the first thing I want to point out there we go, is that there are only or about, depends on whether you're a glass half full or half empty person, a third of applicants get in. That is not that, whether they've, some of those are reapplicants, most of them are not. So you have a 1 in 3 chance just by the numbers. But what we're going to talk about today is how do you increase your chances of getting applied. So who else is getting in? One of the ways you can increase your chances is by doing well as an undergraduate. So you can see here that the applicant average GPA is significantly lower than the people who wind up getting in. So applicants versus enrollees. Likewise, the MCAT score, and I know the MCAT, if you're applying to medical school, the MCAT winds up occupying a very large part of your brain. And we're going to talk a little bit about the MCAT. So let's move on. So one thing that, looking sort of at the application landscape right now, one thing that we've certainly noticed here at Zucker School of Medicine and is true across all US medical schools is that since the pandemic, the number of applicants has increased. So there's a lot of theories as to why this is, but it's not a catch-up game. So there wasn't really a significant dip in applications during the pandemic, and then this is a recovery thing. This is just really increase in applications. So what do medical schools, what do admissions officers, admissions committees look at when you're applying? So I think everybody understands that your GPA, especially your math and science GPA, your MCAT score are going to be big sort of metrics that you can tailor your application towards schools that make you a viable competitor. They also serve as cutoff scores. So if don't waste your time applying to a school, let's say their average MCAT score is a 519 and you got a 509, it's very likely that if you apply to that school or even a lower 504, they're going to not even read your application. They're going to just, screen you out very, very early in the application process. One of the questions we get a lot is, what if I did poorly in my freshman year, but then I did really well? We do actually look carefully at the trajectory of grades. So if you did poorly in your freshman year, all is not lost. As long as you can bring your GPA up, you can, it's not going to have that huge of an impact. It also gives you something to talk about in either your secondary app or your personal statement. What did you learn? If you bombed your freshman year, why and what did you learn from that experience? So the other things that we look at is all your various experiences. So is it necessary to have some kind of clinical experience? No, but it's really, really super helpful. You don't have to be an EMT. You don't have to have, a huge amount of experience, but when you're applying to medical school, it's important to come across as understanding what you're getting into. So you should have, done something that has exposed you to inpatient care is probably the best, or at least, and inpatient care doesn't necessarily have to be in a hospital. It could be in an extended care facility. We want to see community service activities. We want to see leadership activities, and research is nice, but not necessary. I would say if a student or an applicant has a really robust community service activity that they're really, really super engaged in, and they are demonstrating a lot of leadership potential in, and they have clinical experience, the research is nice, but not necessary. Likewise, if a student has a really robust research CV, maybe a paper or two, and not a lot of community service, that's fine. So it's sort of like a balancing game. I think the thing you don't want to do is be a dilettante, where you're running around and getting 4 hours here, 4 hours there, 3 hours here, because that just looks like you're checking boxes. Okay, I did I worked at the food pantry for 4 hours, moving on to the homeless shelter, check that for 4 hours. You don't want to just look like you're literally checking those boxes. Demographics do play a role. Clearly, this is not something you can control. So it's just part of the package. So medical schools are no longer allowed to just, as you know, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in higher education. But as you may have heard, you are still allowed to talk about how your personal journey, whether that involves being a minority or a woman or somebody who has a special, some kind of special physical or mental health challenge. It's fine to put that into that personal statement. We try to, all medical schools try to have a very diverse group. And that's not just about race and ethnicity, it's about socioeconomic status. It's about diversity of experiences. It's about a lot of different things. Okay. So I promised you we would talk about the MCAT because there's always lots of questions about the MCAT. So anybody know what the first year that the MCAT was what was the first year the MCAT was administered? Anybody want to take a guess? 1970s? Good guess. Anybody else? Okay. It was 1928. Woohoo! So this was shortly after the Flexner report, which is this big famous report where this started to standardize medical education across the United States. The MCAT was updated in the 70s and was pretty much the same test. It was a 35 or 40 scale, 40 was the maximum score, 42, 45, I don't remember. Something in the 40s was the maximum score. Now we have a new test which goes into the 500s. So the new test covers more biochemistry, psychology, and sociology. So if you are an undergraduate and you're preparing to take your MCAT, make sure you take Psych 1, at least Psych 1, and a general survey Soc course, because that is going to be a section all by itself. The idea was that the old test was more of a fact-based, so first order questions, what does aldolase do in the Krebs cycle kind of thing. Whereas this newer test is supposed to be more application-based and has you solving problems. It is also very long. I probably don't need to tell you how long the MCAT is. It's a long test. Okay, so the sections, these are the sections. I'm sure you know this. So there's about 59 questions in all of the 3 sections that don't involve reading long passages. The critical analysis and reasoning skills, or CARS, is a little bit shorter because you have to read long passages. And there are tutorials. Some students whiz through CARS, they don't have a problem. Other students, yes, CARS, the dreaded section of the MCAT, yes. There are online tutorials about CARS. I think the thing about CARS is if you are a reader, if you are one of these kids who's been reading since you were 6 years old, then you're going to have an easier time with CARS. If you're not a reader, it's never too late. Just start reading whatever you like to read, whether it's novels or nonfiction or, I want to say magazines, but I don't think they make magazines anymore. So whatever counts for magazines anymore, your favorite websites. Yes, the physics, yes, there is definitely physics on here. Physics, you don't have, so most schools offer 2 flavors of physics. There's the physics for the natural sciences, which doesn't use calculus, and it's usually physics 1 and 2 or a low number. And then there's physics for engineers that does use calculus. It requires that calculus, and it usually has a higher number, usually in the hundreds or something or whatever. You don't need to take that higher level physics. Taking the easier physics without calculus is fine. I tell students, I advise all our students in our BSMD student course. I tell them if some students really love math, and as you may know, calculus was invented to explain physics. So if doing physics via calculus will help you understand and retain the content, then take the harder physics. Otherwise, you can take the easier one. So as you know, the average score is around, so 50th percentile is around 500. And that is if you get 125 on each section. You want to try and shoot for a little bit more than a 125 on each section. I would say aim for 128 on each section. This is the breakdown of year by year. And the score has been creeping up. So for instance, 2 years ago, 80th percentile was 510. Now 80th percentile is 511. Typically 80th percentile is kind of a cutoff between upper tier schools and schools that are a bit easier to get into. And then here we see the GPA. I want to point out, I am not going to go over this graph, but I don't know if Hannah's going to release the slides. For those of you who obsess over the MCAT, you can look at this. The bottom line is that GPA is very related to the MCAT score. So when my students who are in our direct entry BSMD program come to me as freshmen, and they're all very focused on the MCAT because they have to hit a certain score to get into to ensure their seat. I tell them the way to study for the MCAT, especially during your first 2 years, is to do really well, get an A, study hard in all those courses that are tested on the MCAT. So yes, there is no math portion, but some of the physical sciences sections do use math. So yes, so take your chemistry seriously, take your bio courses seriously, take your psych course seriously, take your social course seriously, take your physics course seriously, because when you go to study for the MCAT, you want to be reviewing with an RE, reviewing. You don't want to be learning. The less content you have to learn for the first time when you're studying for the MCAT, the better off you're going to be. Now, what this graph does show, if you take a really sort of serious look at it, is that the lower your GPA is, the more important the MCAT becomes. So if somebody's applying to medical school and has a 3.95, and their GPA is, say, 2 or 3 points below the average for that school, you know, they're, you know, and otherwise they have a stellar application, they're likely to get in as long as they do well in the interview. If a student has a low GPA, but a really high MCAT, again, that may help tip the balance in their favor. Now, because GPA is so closely tied to the MCAT, it's kind of a catch-22. So the lower the MCAT, the lower the GPA, the more important the MCAT score becomes, but it's also more unlikely that you'll get a high MCAT. So if you take anything out of this talk, that is, do well in your science courses. Just learn it the first time. Okay. Another question we get is about MD versus DO schools. So does anybody know how many allopathic MD schools and how many osteopathic osteopathic medical schools there are in the United States? You can put 2 numbers in the chat. Anybody want to give it a guess? Okay, I'll just tell you. So there are 156. Now, if you go to the AAMC, they'll say that there's 154, but that's because two schools decided they didn't agree with the AAMC and pulled out. So as far as the AAMC is concerned, they don't exist. So there are 156 schools that have that are accredited by the LCME, which is the licensing board. Zucker School of Medicine was 133, and we are currently ranked. So there's been, I think, over 40 that have started since 2000, and we are actually ranked as the best or #1 school since 2000. That's open since 2000. There are 38 osteopathic medical schools in the US, and they're accredited by a different accreditation board. And there's only 2 universities that offer both. So what's the difference? So applying to the schools is essentially the same process. The matriculants at DO schools tend to have slightly lower MCAT scores and slightly lower GPAs. And about 1/3 of students who are at DO schools did not get accepted to MD schools. So, but I want to stress that you should not apply to a DO school as your backup or because you know it's an easier way to go. You should really go to a DO school because you want to become a DO. What's the real difference? So in DO school, they teach a more holistic view of the human body, and they teach a skill called spinal manipulation, but DOs are essentially indistinguishable from MDs at this point. They can do all the same things. They can go in all the same specialties that MDs can. I will say that the one thing that is slightly different is that the MD students take a series of licensing exams. DOs have their own licensing exams, but in order for them to sort of cross over into specialties that are certain specialties, they have to take the licensing exam for the MDs as well. So they're allowed to take both the DO and MD licensing exams, whereas the MDs are not allowed to take the DO licensing exams. So does that make sense?
And
Okay.
Dr. Willey, I have a question from a couple
Sure.
questions from the students. So why is it advised that students who specifically want to pursue a career in neurosurgery, is it advised to pursue an MD or a DO? Is there a pro or a con?
So it's typically easier. Your path will be slightly easier if you have an MD, but you can certainly do, you know, if you distinguish yourself as a DO student, you can certainly go into neurosurgery. In fact, at Northwell, we have some DO neurosurgeons.
Amazing. And then in terms of taking the MCAT, which year during a student's undergraduate studies is it ideal to take the MCAT?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. So every student is different. So first of all, don't take it until you've taken all the courses that are tested. I've literally had students, I had a student have to leave our program because he was so anxious about the MCAT, he took it a year early before he finished biochemistry. Now, like, obviously, this shows that this person has really poor judgment. I'm not sure they were cut out to be a physician anyway. Like, why would you take a test that has a whole section on biochemistry before you take biochemistry? Like, that makes no sense. So I'll just point out the obvious. Then what I would do is, so the earliest you should take it, in my view, is the summer between your junior and senior year. And that's only if you finished all the coursework. And you spend most of the summer studying and take it in August. That's if you want to not have a gap year, you should take it by September 1st of your senior year. All right.
That's good advice. Yeah.
So, but that means you're really going to have to work hard, get all those courses done before. I would say what I advise my students is to get all those courses done before the second semester of their junior year. Then what you do is that spring semester of your junior year, you should have saved some of those humanities courses, some of those easier courses that you need to just fill out your degree. So schedule 12 credits, if possible, if you can get away with just 12 credits. So schedule a relatively light spring semester of your junior year and start studying during the semester and into the summer. Then there are a variety of different free tests you can take. So if you go ahead and take a course if you want, or get a tutor if you want, but you can do this on your own. And you should start taking your test, your free tests. Where do you want to be? Well, you figure out what score you want to get. Let's say I'm applying to medical school and I really want a 512. So what I'm going to try and do on my tests is aim for a 514. I want to get a couple of 514 on my practice tests. When I take those practice tests, I'm going to, I'm not going to have the cat sitting on my lap. I'm not going to have my mother bringing me lunch. I'm going to pretend I'm in one of those spaces and really simulate the real test. I'm going to aim for a 514 because that gives me a little bit of buffer so that if nerves, have their way with me, I can still probably hit my 512. What I see more often than not is the wonderful effects of adrenaline. And if I go in there with a 514-ish tests, somewhere in the vicinity of 514, I may walk out of there with a 517. So yeah, but aim your practice test for 2 points higher than what you want as your final score. That's my advice.
Gotcha. And I'll just ask one more question, and then I'll let you get back to your
Sure.
presentation. These are all such great questions. Thank you all for posting them. But do medical schools look at what major you do and GPA related to that?
Yes, absolutely. So most of our majors are biochemistry, biology, some kind of pre-health, something or other. Does that mean that that's what you need to major in? Absolutely not. You can remember diversity is key. So if you want to major in geography and take all the pre-med courses and then somehow tie your geography major to medicine, maybe you do a capstone project about global health, so you can definitely explore, different majors. Just make sure that you take the pre-med requirements. And I would say beyond Bio 1 and Bio 2, if you can fit it, if you're not a bio major or a biochemistry major, you should also try and squeeze genetics and cell biology into your schedule, because that will really, really help you with the MCAT. So, yeah. I just saw a question in the chat about a college that has grade deflation. We understand, like, when you're applying to medical school, the competitiveness of the college in terms of grade systems is definitely taken into account. Okay, any other questions, or should we keep plowing through here? How are we doing on
I've gotten
time?
a few questions. We'll take one more and then you can
Sure.
continue. Because I know you have so much amazing information in the presentation. But do you have any advice for what you look for in a BSMD applicant?
Oh, I could talk about BSMDs all day. You should invite me back for another. No. So because I advise all our BSMDs. So the BSMDs, so in my world, you're babies. You know, you are high school students. You're 16 years old. So what I really want to see, what we really want to see is some kind of clinical exposure. We want to see that you understand what healthcare is, which is hard to do by the time you're 16. Right? But what we worry about is that students apply because their parents are making them apply, or because they have this idealized understanding of what it means to be a doctor because they've seen it on, you know, their favorite TV show or whatever. So get some clinical experience, do some kind of a research project, distinguish yourself in some kind of leadership role. You know, sports is great, music is great. It's a little bit like, you know, it's sort of applying to college on steroids, essentially, is what it is. It's like pretending you're, you know, you're essentially everything that you would need to do to apply to the best schools, plus the clinical exposure piece. Okay, so let's just talk about the application. So the personal statement, we get a lot of questions about the personal statement. And so what I've done here, sort of put them into different buckets. And you can see that they're, you know, you can be creative. You could start with a quote. You can be informative. You just look through this. Hannah, are you going to share these slides with the students afterwards?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can
okay.
post them on the
So good.
Facebook group and the Slack channels for you guys to look at afterwards.
That's great. So my advice is pick what feels most comfortable to you. Don't just say, oh, that sounds like it would be the best one for somebody to read. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. If you use an approach that's not comfortable to you, it will come across in the writing. So these are some of the suggestions that the AAMC puts out there. And, you know, why do you want to be a physician? I'm just going to tell you right now, a lot of students start with a discussion of a grandparent who died, which is fine and is valid. It's just that we get a lot of essays that start that way. So it's fine to talk about someone close to you dying as being, especially a grandparent, as being an incentive. I would just maybe not have that be your first sentence. The first sentence is so important. It's what's going to grab the reader. And we read a lot of, you know, when I was 14 or when I was X age, my beloved grandma, grandpa passed away. And so you just don't want to sound like everybody else. I'm not trying to belittle your experience. I'm just trying to give you advice about how to bring the reader into your personal statement. Don't shy away from hardships, obstacles, challenges, especially if they are elsewhere in your application. So, you know, we're going to, you know, somebody's going to be looking at your application pretty hard. And they're not going to gloss over the fact that you got a C in, you know, something, or you took a semester off and there's no record of what you did during that semester. So, you know, talk about it, explain it. What did you learn from it? How did you grow from it? How is it informing your decision to be a physician? How will it inform your role as a physician? So that's a really good thing to do. So yes, so don't wander, stay focused. Please don't use a lot of big words just because you think it makes you sound smart. It doesn't. And one thing I really want to say is proofread. I will tell you that applications sink because of typos or grammar errors in the essay. So show it to as many people as you know you can stand to have read it. Stay away from the I did this, I did that, I did the next thing, this led me to do this. So try to limit the number of times you say I. Try to tell a story. Don't have it, try not to have each paragraph a different topic. Have it read as a story. I'll just leave this here. You can read through this. I'm not going to read it to you, but notice that it starts and ends with proofread. So yeah, so it should be self-reflective. This is a chance for you to sort of start with an idea and really reflect back on yourself and share with others about your journey to where you are at this moment in time applying to medical school. Try and use a very active voice. Stay away from cliches. Yeah, just get people to read it. The secondary essay, I would say, is as important as the primary essay. So in the process of applying to medical school, there's a screening process where basically, will this person be invited for an interview or not? Those folks read a lot of applications. They're not going to read very carefully your whole personal statement, but they will read the secondary app because it's short. So sometimes, so at the screening stage, it may be that your secondary app questions get more scrutiny than your big, long personal statement that you poured blood, sweat, and tears into. So don't downplay the importance of the secondary app. You can use this as an opportunity to fill in missing information, to talk about just like your personal statement, but you can't jam everything into your personal statement. So when you're writing your personal statement, if there's something that you want to say but you don't have room or you can't weave it in, jot that down, because you can use that for a secondary app. So it should, complement it without overlapping. All right. I think I covered this. Yeah, don't try to fit more words in by using a small font. I mean, that's just silly. I think they character count now anyway. So I think the rules of thumb are very much similar to your personal statement. Again, make sure you have somebody proofread it. Read it before you show. A good rule of thumb, another rule about proofreading, is to read it out loud to yourself. You will come across all those missing words or funny punctuation. Okay, so that's the personal statement. Now, because it's 2023 and just because we can, we have a new bevy of video tests called situational judgment tests. So I don't know if you've heard about these. Casper is the one that's been around the longest. So the idea is that medical schools want to learn more about their applicants other than what's on the piece of paper. They want to see their applicants thinking in real time and testing those sort of soft skills, ethics, integrity, judgment, so on and so forth. So you may be asked to take the Casper Acuity Insights test, which is a written test. So they show you some video situations, and then you have a few minutes to write a response. You may be asked to take the Casper Snapshot, which is also one which is a videotaped response. It's much shorter. And now, since Casper's been making a lot of money on this, of course, the AAMC has to get in the game and they have just released a new version of their situational judgment test called Preview, which is very similar. There are tutorials online that you can go to find more about these tests. I've never taken one. I would say it's really helpful to view those tutorials and to think about sample questions because these are timed and you really only have one opportunity. Okay, woohoo, you got an interview. Now what? So there's a couple different types of interviews. The MMI, the multiple mini interview, is the most common. And so this is where you have 2 minutes. You're presented with a short written scenario. You have 2 minutes to think about it. Then these are usually online. Then you answer the question or discuss it with an interviewer, somebody who sits there on the other end of the screen. And you have 5 or depending on 6, 7 minutes to discuss it. And the interviewer is only going to ask follow-up questions about what you're saying. They're not going to ask you anything about your personal life or why you're applying to medical school. It's all going to be focused on this one situation. And they're usually ethical situations that very similar to what Casper and the preview tests are asking. Behavioral is sort of, you sit down for 20 minutes with an interviewer who's going to ask you some questions. What's your best idea? Have you ever failed, and how did you overcome that? What's your favorite book even? Then there are these panels. That's less common. I think they're used a lot in different, like PT school will use a panel approach sometimes. And then there's the group. And again, these are used more like for physical therapists, for nursing school, so on and so forth, where the group of applicants is actually together and they're talking to a group of panelists. And those are very few and far between. Super important after the interview, send a thank you note. Unless you don't want to go. If you go to the school and you decide, I don't care if they accept me, I'm not going there, don't bother sending a thank you note. But send a thank you note within 24 hours. You can either send it directly to each of the interviewers. It's probably the best way to do it rather than the admissions inbox. Just be really careful. We have gotten thank you notes that have been directed to the wrong school. If accepted, I really enjoyed seeing Stanford's medical school. Whoops, this is the Zucker Medical School. So just, it's okay to copy paste. Just make sure, read it 15 times before you hit that send button. And finally, there's the letter of intent. So this is super important because the way that we're able to see what applicants is doing has changed in the last couple of years. And so it's a little bit of a black box, and medical schools are more likely to accept you if they know you will come. So if you go to a medical school if you interview at a medical school that you really, really, really want to go to, send a letter of intent. And it says, if you were accepted, you will attend. Now, the issue there is that you don't know what kind of financial package they're going to give you. So if you need to wait and weigh the different financial packages offered by different schools, then, hold off. But, if you're 100% sure you're going to you really want to go to this medical school, send that letter of intent. And I think, okay, alternative paths. I will say a little bit about BSMD programs. So BSMD programs, there are different types. There are 3+4, there's 4+4, there's even some 2+4. And in fact, I don't know, some website says that we're 6 years. We're actually 8 years. We're 4+4. So meaning 4 years undergrad, 4 years medical school. So it's always 4 years of medical school. The question is, what happens to the undergrad piece? So the shorter the undergrad piece, the more prescriptive it is. In other words, that you're going to get to college and they're going to tell you these are the courses you take. This is the GPA you need to have, so on and so forth. personally, I think the 4+4 programs are most desirable because when you get to medical school, you're going to be in a class of students who are much older than you and have many more life experiences. And it's good for you to give yourself a little bit of time to grow up, to mature, to do different things while you're an undergraduate. Go ahead and do that study abroad or get involved in a big deal research project or a big deal community service project. What I tell my students is that it's a pressure cooker, because to stay in the program, you know, you can't get a C, you have to maintain, you know, in our program, you can't get a C, you have to maintain a 3.6 GPA, you have to get 80th percentile on your MCAT. So it's definitely a pressure cooker. So if you, you know, if you have, you know, if that would make you nervous, don't do it. It is a whole different experience during your undergraduate career. If you want a quote unquote normal undergraduate experience, BSMD programs are not for you. Post-bac programs, so there's two types. So if you are a career, so you majored in philosophy or, you know, film, and now you want to go to medical school, you can go to these programs, these post-baccalaureate programs that in a year or two, depending on the program, they crunch everything in. And then there's sort of for people who maybe their GPA is a little bit low, they need to do some remediation. There are a variety of different programs that you can go to. Another one that's good that's not on here is Drexel. The post-baccalaureate programs, the post-bac programs have these linkage options, which basically says that when I finish this post-bac program, I would like to come to your school. So people who have a linkage, sometimes the MCAT is waived if they got a certain SAT score and a certain GPA, and it's the linkage is an agreement between the medical school and the post-bac program that says anybody who links to us, as long as they interview okay and they hit a GPA, we will save a seat for them. So you can see that we have linkage programs with these post-bac programs. Okay, this is the last slide, and then we can just do a quick Q&A. So yes, it is a marathon, not a sprint. Please don't try and keep your stress level down, keep your eye on the prize, and really, you know, enjoy what you're learning as you're learning it. So yeah, that's my word of advice. I see, what about engineers? So engineers, we love engineers at the Zucker School of Medicine. You just have to go back and take the physics. I'm sorry, not the physics, the biology, and sometimes the biochem. But I think engineers make great physicians. So, all right, Hannah, I'm going to let you do the Q&A, because if I look at it, I will get completely overwhelmed. All right, so I hope this was helpful so far.
I've learned so much myself as coming from a clerical background. I've always wondered about the process of applying to med school. So I just want to thank you again for sharing all this information. I can only imagine how beneficial this is for everybody who's tuning in. Speaking on engineering students, what are some extracurriculars that would help strengthen someone's application if they're an engineering student as a strong traditional med applicant?
So I would say, you know, there's no one answer to that. Anything that shows leadership and commitment. So if you're an athlete, let's say, and then you become captain of your team, that's amazing. We love, you know, varsity athletics. Yet no, obviously you don't need to be a genius, you know, to play tennis, but it shows that you're committed. It shows that you're able to maintain your GPA while you have this huge other commitment. Other activities, you know, again, music if you participate in the college orchestra or band, again, that's a huge commitment. Do you have some, and then you take on a leadership role. Obviously, then the more obvious ones are research and community service. But again, you want to focus on one or two, you know, if you do community service, again, find something you can be passionate about, that you can really spend a lot of time and, you know, get that leadership position, and show that you know that you are able to make these kinds of commitments, as opposed to I'm going to check off the box for the soup kitchen, the homeless shelter, the you know, whatever else, the tutoring the kids online. Like, yeah, we get it. When we see 6 hours here, you know, 10 hours there, 12 hours there, we just, you know, okay, that's a box checker. Don't be a box checker.
I actually got a couple questions from some international students. How different is the application process for people who are applying from countries other than the United States for med schools in the US?
So you have to really explore what the policy is at the specific medical school you're applying to. So some schools are very amenable and don't put a lot of barriers in terms of international students. Others want the person to already have permanent residency in the United States before they accept them. So I can't really answer that question other than to say that you really need to look at so what I would do is, you know, figure out what medical schools you'd be competitive at first, and then ask, you know, what's the deal with international students at this school. I saw a question in the chat about somebody who was over 40. I would say, again, what you want to do is you want to look at some medical schools. Like, we've had students over 40, obviously not a lot, but we accept them. Some medical schools don't go there. So again, find out where you're competitive, and then look and see what's their history of taking older students. And if you can't figure it out and it's a school you really want to go to, don't be shy. Just send a letter to the admissions office. Introduce yourself, you know. They'll be looking for your application then when it comes.
And then I have a couple other questions that were kind of pertaining to the BSMD track. So when do you actually, like, when can you participate in that type of program? And is there like a certain cutoff in which you can pursue a BSMD?
So BSMD programs you have to apply to right from high school. So you can't, as far as I know, there are no BSMD programs where, you know, as a sophomore in your undergraduate years, you can then transfer into that program. So you have to be accepted right from high school. So if you're a high school student and you're 100% sure you want to become a physician, and you have some, you know, either you have some time to get some clinical experience, or you've already had some clinical experience, some research experience, some good leadership experience, you did really well on your SAT, meaning for the 1600 score, nobody looks at that. I don't even know if they still do the 2100 thing. For the 1600 score, meaning you got at least a 1470, then, and you're going to get really strong recommendations from your teachers and your guidance counselor, then you can apply. But it's very, very competitive. We have 600. I think it's 600 applicants for 10 spots.
Wow.
Yeah. So it becomes relatively random at the end. You know, we have way more than 10 qualified applicants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at some point, you know, thank God I don't have to make up the final decision. But yeah.
Actually, I feel like this is a great question, considering like COVID times and like the past couple of years being kind of weird. But do gap years look bad on an application?
No, we love gap years. Gap years are great. So 3/4 of our students here have taken a gap year, at least one. So it used to be back in, so back in the day, so if your parents are physicians, they may be telling you that the gap year is like a gap year is a bad thing, because back in the day when they went to medical school, it was. But times have changed, and we really like students to do gap years. It's not a bad thing. It lets you, get that research experience, or do the clinical, outreach, or, community service, or whatever. I would say if you're going to take a gap year, though, do something that's relevant. Even let's say, to make ends meet, you have to, to waitress. Fine. But in your spare time, make sure you're doing some community service. All right. So try and find a job, a paying job that is relevant. And if you can't, you're going to have to do something on the side that you can write about.
And I actually got a question about like leadership experience and would starting a business and perhaps like a tutoring service. Would that be something that would demonstrate leadership, even if it's not like participating in an extracurricular?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of our students who have, especially those with gap years, and if you have, I'm just kind of glancing at the chat, if you have a gap year as an undergrad and it is, the way to look at it is, if you have a personal situation that requires that you suspend your education, that's a hard decision. It's a really hard decision. And, give yourself a pat on the back for making that hard decision, taking care of what you had to take care of, and then coming back and doing well. And that's how you should present it. Like, I had to make this really hard decision. I didn't want to suspend my education, or but I did it, and I did it well, and this is what I learned. Yes, people who go out and start businesses, or who have work as consultants, again, those are really great things to include on your application, and it's a great thing. Master's degree, yes, master's degrees are always helpful. It's not helpful, beneficial. It's not like you need one, but yeah, it's a good thing.
Oh man, there's so many good questions. I'm trying to pick one because we're almost out of time.
Giovanna, yes, absolutely include that. That's an amazing thing. You want to include all those sorts of things. Yeah.
All right. I'll just ask you one more question, but like, what's a way that an applicant can kind of show that perhaps like getting a lower GPA earlier on in their undergrad, like how can they use their maybe personal statement to highlight how much growth that they've made throughout their studies?
So the answer, that's a really good question, because that's not, first of all, know that that's not uncommon. Right? You are not alone if that is you. Don't dwell on why it happened. Oh, because it sounds like you're making excuses. Oh, I had this, I had that. Blah, blah. Sort of very succinctly explain why you didn't do well, a sentence or two, and then talk about how you turned it around. I sought help. I learned new study skills. I became more focused. All the things you learned to overcome that. You'd be surprised how many students get to medical school and have never gone to see a professor during office hours for help, because they were really good students. They didn't need to. We like it on the admissions committee if we see students who say, I learned how to actively study. I learned that studying wasn't just reading. I learned how to ask for help. That's a good thing. So if that's you, if your trajectory has been up, again, don't make excuses for yourself, but really talk about what you learned and how you got over that.
Amazing. Well, We are unfortunately out of time, and Dr. Wiley is actually giving a couple other presentations, so we don't want to wear her out too early on in the day. But I just if you guys enjoyed this this talk, we would love to hear your comments in the chat, and I just want to thank you again for being a part of our BrainterNs programming. It has been such an honor having you.
Oh, it was fun.
Throughout
Yeah.
the BrainterNs programs and in past summers and this summer. We're really grateful to have you join us, and we just want to thank you again for this.
Sure, it was my
informative
pleasure.
talk.
My pleasure, and good luck to all of you. And remember, enjoy the journey, as trite as that sounds. You know, keep your
Amazing.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Take care. And I'm going to sign off, you guys, so that we can just have a clean recording. I'll sign back on for our second webinar today, which is a virtual, I can't talk, virtual OR with Dr. Yafel Cerulli. So we'll be back in just a few. Take care. Oh, it wasn't too stressful. No worries. I'm enjoying my time. This has been a great informative webinar for me too. So thank you. Thank you for worrying about me, guys. No, this has been great for me too. I'm log back on in like 1 minute.